I'm Jesse Munro. Grew up in Saskatchewan, born in Flin Flon, Manitoba. I'm a father of 3 and married to my wife. We've been married for 16 years now. And we live in a beautiful little town in Saskatchewan with our kids. Love it. Things that give me joy, primarily my family. So each of my kids, huge source of sustaining power for me. My wife is my lighthouse. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for her. I think that's pretty plain. I think everyone who knows me knows that. I am primarily interested, due to my limitations, with reading. I love digging into classic works. Not that I'm smart, just I've always been precocious, I guess. I have multiple sclerosis. I was diagnosed about 17 years ago now. I was diagnosed. So just before my wife and I got together, I was discovered that I had something wrong with me. So I experienced relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis for several years, or at least what we thought was that. I've since been diagnosed with active progressive multiple sclerosis, which is, I guess, the least favorable kind. Well, with all the time that I spend going in and out of hospitals, naturally I have lots of interactions with doctors, nurses, other medical staffs, social workers, and I've noticed myself becoming more leery around, just cagey around healthcare workers, generally speaking, in the last few years, predominantly because of my, I think because of my understanding that this is an option that I have to choose for myself now. Like, this isn't like, it's not like, oh, I can't go and ask them to help me with my suicide, my assisted death. But they're thinking that if I'm ready to ask, they're going to be ready to provide, which creates the sort of a fear in me. Like, maybe I'm going to be weak at some point when I go to a doctor. Maybe I'm going to be feel sad and just down and weakened when I go to the ER. Naturally, a person would be in a weakened state. And so in that moment, maybe if a doctor or a nurse did present me with the opportunity, I would happily jump at it as an escape. And so I think I've been going to the doctor actually a lot less. I think I don't go. There's been a few health scares in the last 6 months where I would have gone to an ER, gotten checked over, maybe gotten some care for something, where I just didn't even consider it. I would rather stay at home sick, suffering, than go and deal with it. Because, as I say, I've got this little fear in the back of my mind, like, maybe if I'm offered, I'll go for it. Because I don't want to give anybody the idea that I'm looking for a way out, but at the same time, I think we all have our times when we're suffering and down. Well, one particular time when I ended up at the ER, I was run down, probably some type of an infection, which happens from time to time. And everything seemed to be just sort of a standard trip into the doctor. I went in with EMTs. They brought me to the hospital. I was in the waiting area at the hospital, and then proceeded through normally into the ER. And as soon as I saw a nurse and a doctor, and they began sort of trying to figure out what was going on with me, how I was feeling, what I was dealing with, there was also this kind of a anticipation hanging in what they were asking, and then they followed it with sort of the kicker of, have you considered what you'll do long term? Have you made any end of life plans? And I don't always get the feeling that somebody's suggesting to me that maybe I'm, like it's inappropriate for me to be continuing to eat, but that felt like it. Yeah, it's a discrimination, which I'm not a huge fan of looking at myself as a victim of things, but in this situation, I guess it kind of is appropriate to consider that.
It is discriminatory.
And it's a discrimination, and it's a judgment. It's a judgment of me, and it reminds me that I am judged. So medical professionals should never be in that position where they're reminding me that I'm judged, that there are people who, I know that when I go out, there's people who see me and they think like, oh man, why is that guy even bothering, kind of that shouldn't have been present in the doctor's office or the ER.
Which is interesting because I've never thought that. Like until that moment, had never crossed my mind at all. That we would think that there was a burden on society that, like, why doesn't he just kill himself kind of thing. I've never ever thought that. And so then when she asked that, I just was confused.
I've seen enough of it that I know that that exists.
Yeah. But
I've seen enough of people definitely adding it up.
I asked her what she meant by that, and she clarified.
Well, and do you remember who it was who somebody in the EU referred to the earth having a problem of too many useless eaters? Our prime minister is a member of a governing body that does examine whether or not, it looks at me in a utilitarian livestock way. I am not pulling the plow and I'm in pain. That's the equation. It's a simple equation in their mind as far as I can tell. I don't think I could tell if there was a broader societal shift. All I know is that in my mind there has been a change.
Yeah.
Right? That it's important to me that now my government has an exit strategy for life. It matters that I'm part of a economic consideration. Just prior to having gone into the hospital for this particular ER visit, I had found out that my uncle was in the process of planning his medical-assisted suicide. And he went through with it. So it's definitely something that's very close to me in my life, in that I have a family member that actually, like my uncle, who I loved dearly. And he was losing his eyesight in his old age. And so he scheduled his death. When I compare that level of suffering, losing eyesight in your old age, to what I go through sometimes, I think it makes me question myself. Yeah. So when I was in the ER and the doctor and the nurse were standing there, it just leaves me running an equation in my mind that I don't want to run. I can't avoid doing the sort of the life calculus on that. Am I a bad person for wanting to be alive? And I don't think that that's a question that should even be, that shouldn't come from me. And I don't think it does. I think I ask that because of the development of medical assisted death in Canada. And it frustrates me because I know I'm not the only person who would think that way. I think that if it's suggested, that there is a time that people go and schedule their death, I'm beyond that point. It sort of disgusts me that it is something that has to be on the mind of medical professionals. The Hippocratic Oath should be so locked into their mind that to ask something like that would be disgusting, right? I would assume that there are probably plenty of doctors who feel disgusted by it. Well, you know, here's something that I think maybe people don't consider this, that to me, my overcoming my suffering brings a good into the world. I have a place in showing people that the minor suffering that we experience day to day can be dealt with. If so, maybe some of the other men in the parish can see me continuing to come out, that I'm still there. Oh, he's back again another week. And they can think to themselves, I have all of these troubles and sufferings, but hey, I can walk. And if Jesse can make it through another week, trapped as he might feel, I don't have to feel quite as trapped. There's a way out of this. We're all here giving one another hope. We're all meant to be icons. We're reflecting the light that's shone down on us, and MAID, the existence of medical assisted death, flies in the face of that value. It treats it as though it's worthless. My dad, when he was passing away a few years ago, he died from bone cancer, and I'm sure it was very painful, a good deal of the time. But I got to spend time with him. I spent a month with him at the end of his life, and to watch him bravely go to the end. He wasn't doing it simply for himself. He was doing it for me, but he wasn't doing it for just me. He was doing it for my mom, my brother, my sister. He was having a good end, that we all might feel confident as he passed. So it left me really wanting to have that. And so I feel like somebody's trying to cheat me out of that a little bit, or somebody's offering me a little bit of a trick. I shouldn't have an eject lever under my seat. That's not my choice. That's not my choice. I distinctly remember the way that the nurse asked about it. It felt like, you're taking up a lot of our time here, And so, to me, just the existence of legislation that allows for people to make these sort of choices and plans is too much. It's too much because it creates such a psychologically destructive environment for the doctors, for the nurses, for the patients in particular, for the family members. And I have the perspective of a family member from my uncle doing this. And for the patient as well, clearly. It is evil to make it easy for others to commit evil. And that's what this is. This is giving people an opportunity to make an evil choice that they wouldn't want to make given proper care. I think that I would never make the medical assisted death decision so long as I had a continual hope and care, from my family, from the doctors. Well, when you're sitting in the ER and you're nauseated and you're in agony and you've had 16 years of struggling and fighting, it can feel like it makes sense. And my fear is that there will come a time that it will feel like it makes sense. And you can't come back from that. So I don't want to allow any room for that in my life. I think it is now the duty of doctors and nurses to make sure that their patients don't feel like they're being offered MAID at all. I think that the opposite needs to happen. I keep going one direction, and then like, as I'm speaking, I'm like, there's 3 other things in my brain that are rambling because I do feel like, I really do feel incredibly strongly about this, and it really does make me feel sick inside. Like, I've been in a hospital before where I did want to kill myself. I did want it to be over. But that was all fear. I needed a medical professional who understood. And my experience is that they do. And so when I had one that stepped up and did look at me with eyes of, look, let's just be utilitarian about this. Don't you think that it would be time to make an end-of-life plan? I remember being, all of a sudden, so I went from being nauseated, agonized, and then angry. And I shouldn't have been in a place to have anger when I was trying to simply just, deal with the situation at hand, being sick. Instead, I was all of a sudden in this mental place of trying to decide whether or not I am selfish. If the assisted death laws make room for people who are depressed, sad, suffering financial ruin, if that's the line at which, that's the baseline of, well, this is where you should check out, or at least the government considers this a place that would maybe be the average time to check out, I'm way beyond the average time to check out. And I actually puts me in a position where I actually sometimes feel like, am I actually evil for continuing to be here? So suddenly I'm asking myself questions like, do I bring enough value? Whenever I heard about medical assisted death years ago, it was always for these extreme situations, right? The most extreme example of somebody suffering. And it was like, shouldn't we be able to help this person who's right on the verge of going into shock and dying? Shouldn't we be able to just help them a little bit? That was sort of the way it seemed, but it turned so quickly to something where it's, are you feeling down today? Maybe you don't want it tomorrow.
The baseline has shifted so much, and it's
Well,
probably going to shift more.
The conversation itself, right? So the Overton window has just moved from being a conversation, like I say, about people right at the limits of being alive and dying, to a conversation that's about poor people. That's where it does feel malevolent, where it does feel like, oh, if I was in government and it was up to me and I could just change one setting, give people a little less financial assistance, a little less healthcare, and that's going to bring the number of medical assisted deaths up in my country and get rid of people who cost a lot of money, because I cost a lot of money to be alive. Well, do you remember Futurama? Amongst all of the future trappings, they always had these, they looked like telephone booths, but they were just assisted suicide booths. And it was just like you could pop in and throw in a quarter and end your life, kind of an idea. And I feel like this isn't far off from that. Like what's the fundamental difference? that I have to talk to a doctor. So long as MAID exists, the legislation is on the books, it's, to me, incumbent on doctors, any medical professionals, to now resist, lean against it, make sure your patient knows that you're there to help them, not help them move on. Okay, you know what we maybe didn't talk a ton about is that my life is really good. Like, my life is awesome. And even though my life is awesome, it's still hard to know that, it's hard to contend with the existence of medical assisted death, even knowing how much I love my life. I suffer, so I can be weak and I can be down and I can make rash decisions. And I'm being encouraged or given the opportunity to make the most rash decision. I don't want to sound like I'm imploring people to understand that my life is good, but I do think that I think it actually might be hard for some people to see my life as good. To be completely frank, I don't think my life is any worse than yours. I can only really say it just frankly. My hope in Christ is why I live. It's what gives me confidence that I will continue to stand against this, that I'm not going to fall to the weakness that I've referred to a couple of times. I'm confident that I'll have the same response if I'm asked again, that I'll be angry. I won't be, but angry in the best sort of Christ clearing the temple of the tax collectors. I can't imagine being alone and being faced with this. I think I would fall to it. So I really hope that people who have others in their life who are suffering or struggling with health issues understand that this exists. It's an option now. Your family members are going to be faced with it at times, and stand with them, support them. Life is good. Life is intrinsically good. There's no separating life and good. So,
what's your final kind of closing statement to Saskatchewan, Canada, the world?
This isn't the road we want to go down, I don't think. Our province has a legacy of compassion, and particularly in the world of healthcare. Tommy Douglas he must just be rolling over in his grave as we bastardize healthcare and what it is and what it's supposed to be. Invert it. Turn it into a system of death rather than a system of life. Please, with medical assisted death being legal, you can't stay neutral. If you care for somebody who has an illness, support them. If you're a medical professional, doctor, nurse, social worker in the hospitals, you have to work against MAID, not just be neutral.